Manchester City's Kevin De Bruyne has been talking about the possibility of leaving the club if the impending Champions League ban isn't lifted. Here's what he had to say, quote, "Once there's a final decision, I will look at it. 2 years without Champions League football would be long. 1 year is something I might be able to cope with." Gab Marcotti still with us. Craig Burley joins the show as well. Craig, what do you make of what Kevin De Bruyne has to say here? No Champions League football might mean an exit at City.
Well, it might mean an exit at City if the club allow him that exit. Kevin De Bruyne is on a long-term big money contract there, and rightly so. However, it may be laughable to throw out the word loyalty there out here in the spectrum, because there is really no loyalty in most sports these days, and that goes all the way to the top. Look, it's understandable players may be concerned about the situation. We don't know what's going to happen. But there are other things out there to win for Manchester City if the worst-case scenario comes to the fore. You know, they've been toppled at the moment by Liverpool domestically. There's cup competitions in England. There's a Euros in 2021 for Belgium. There's a World Cup in 2022. So the Champions League is important. Of course it is. But it is not the be-all and end-all. And I think Manchester City, in particular the hierarchy, will be looking for, and I say inverted commas, some sort of loyalty from these players, bearing in mind the remuneration that they get paid. And, you know, I think they would be disappointed if players would look for an exit. But I think ultimately that's maybe what some players Sebi will try and do.
Gab, you got to think that clubs around Europe would be lining up to sign a player like Kevin De Bruyne. What could be some realistic suitors?
You know, I look at this a little bit differently. I look at this as the fact that Kevin De Bruyne turns 29 years old in June. I look at the fact that obviously he had a really bad injury a season ago, which caused him to miss most of the season. He's on an absolutely enormous contract, one of the highest, I think one of the top 3 or 4 highest paid players in the Premier League. And, you know, this might seem sort of perverse, but I think if you're Begiristain, you're saying, you know what, or if you're Man City, maybe if we have to have 2 years without Champions League revenues, we've got a guy who's making an absolute ton of money. So it's very difficult to sell him because few clubs can afford him. You know, maybe if he floats that possibility, maybe we get an offer. Maybe it's not the end of the world. You know, maybe Bernardo Silva and Gundogan and Phil Foden or whatever. You know, David Silva potentially leaving as well. His contract obviously is up. You know, maybe it could almost be a blessing in disguise. Let's plant the idea and see what goes out there. I don't have any kind of issue with this. I wouldn't see De Bruyne being disloyal. He's at that age and that contract where, you know, he's a huge contributor, but if you have somebody take him off your hands and obviously you get a sizable amount of money back, and that is a big if given the current situation, maybe I don't think it's the end of the world at all for City.
Speaking of maybe some other potential moves, Liverpool are reportedly in the driver's seat for 2 big signings, Timo Werner and Koulibaly of Napoli. Craig, let's go to the fantasy world here. If Liverpool got those 2 players, who would stop them?
Well, you know, it depends what others do. And it doesn't always necessarily work out that way. You might be competition for places. If they were to go and get those 2 players, it's a big statement. Particularly, I think, the Koulibaly signing, even though, you know, he's the older, I believe, of the 2. But to go in there and cement a partnership, potentially a centre-half partnership with 2 of the greatest centre-halves of this generation would be a heck of a backbone to the team. The Timo Werner situation is he'd be fighting for a place, but he is adaptable, he's flexible, and he can play in different positions. But it would be a big statement from Liverpool. It would be very costly in terms of transfer and salary. They would have to get players out. But it would be a big statement from the Fenway Group and Jurgen Klopp to say, listen, we know whatever's happened in the season, whether it's voided, finished, or whatever, we put down a marker last year with our performances, and we're not going to rest in our laurels. We're going to go out and we're going to try and improve this team. And this is the guys we're going to go after. So it would be a heck of a statement.
Gab, you think it's realistic?
Well, Koulibaly has a clause, Werner has an understanding, so, you know, both those guys, you put your money down and you bring them in, you'd have to obviously pay them well. And I think, you know, given the pandemic, there will be a situation where, you know, other potential suitors are gonna probably find it difficult to keep up. Koulibaly Van Dijk on paper as a defensive partnership would be unbelievable, but that's on paper. You need to see how well they can work together. But then Klopp's got a tremendous track record there. And I love the Timo Werner thing because, right now, Liverpool have enjoyed all the success with Divock Origi, with all respect in the world, coming off the bench. And, you imagine a rotation of that front four, given the versatility those players have. And that would be absolutely devastating.
Gab, we've heard a lot of names come up linked with Paul Pogba. What about Inter Milan? That seems to be the latest.
Yeah, Gazzetta dello Sport in Milan going really, really big on this. They fashioned some sort of scenario where Lautaro Martinez goes to Barcelona and Pogba comes in. And look, I'm not buying any of this right now, given that Inter's financial situation remains a little bit parlous, given that I think one of the single biggest determinants of what Inter Milan do, if and when the transfer market reopens, is whether Mauro Icardi stays in Paris, where Paris Saint-Germain, where he's on loan, or whether Paris Saint-Germain pick up the option to keep him. Because if they do that, then all of a sudden you've got 80 million euros in there. But taking on Pogba, given his wages, given that you've just signed Christian Eriksen, given that if Lautaro Martinez leaves, you will need a forward as well, to me seems like absolute madness. It seems like one of those stories that's, out there to help Mino Raiola remind us all that Pogba's still there and might consider a move if the right club comes along.
Craig, what do you think? Paul Pogba to Inter Milan, a good fit?
Well, I think any club that's striving for success, even though Paul Pogba hasn't been his sizzling best for the last couple of years, at least at Man United, he's still one of the most talented players in world football, and he's a game changer. And, I think ultimately, and we talked about this when Christian Eriksen signed, Gab and all the boys, was just how does Eriksen fit into the Conte system and how would he shoehorn them in there? Well, being a playmaker, Paul Pogba is much easier to shoehorn in because he's more of a natural midfielder. That being said, we know Antonio Conte gets frustrated on the sidelines. We know he sort of berates players, cajoles them, and he's very effervescent. And you wonder how that relationship would work. I'm with Gab on it. I think at the moment it's a little bit pie in the sky. And I think Paul Pogba will probably sit and wait and hope, dare I say it, to get a better offer than Inter Milan.
Well, thank you very much for watching ESPN on YouTube. For more sports highlights and analysis, be sure to download the ESPN app. And for live streaming, premium content, and let's not forget as well, ESPN FC 7 days a week. Subscribe to ESPN+.